I traveled to Italy and tested 29 espresso shots. My goal was to prove that modern specialty espresso is too strong, and it turned out I was completely wrong. In my last video, I interviewed Andrea Eiermann, who's a coffee industry veteran and researcher, and he's been studying espresso globally. And he had a pretty provocative take, and that is that espresso is dying. People aren't drinking straight espresso anymore. It's become more of an ingredient for milk drinks, iced coffees, Americanos, and so on. And he showed me data that specialty coffee serves much stronger espresso than commercial coffee shops. So my hypothesis was simple. Specialty coffee had made espresso too intense for regular people, and that's why they're ordering all types of drinks except straight espresso. And because that's what the majority orders, in turn, the cafes make the espresso even stronger so it can cut through a lot of milk. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. I thought if I went to Italy, where espresso culture is still alive, I brought my refractometer to test it, I would find that they were drinking milder shots on average, and that would prove that we need to dial it back a little bit. So that was my theory when I landed in Milan, and the first shots seemed to confirm it. 8% TDS, reasonable, approachable, but already by the second and third shots that I measured, something started to feel a bit off. Italian espresso wasn't milder, it was just as strong, or perhaps even stronger than specialty coffee in other parts of the world. So the mean TDS across all my tested samples from Italy was 10.40 TDS, and this was mostly data from typical local cafes where people walk in, they stand at the bar, order a quick shot, and then leave. So my hypothesis, it had turned out to be completely wrong. Now, here's what really confused my brain, and that is if Italian espresso is that strong, stronger than most specialty coffee shops, it should be punishing, difficult to drink, harsh, bitter, overwhelming. So how come the locals can actually get it down? But that wasn't really the case. At one point during the trip, I was drinking yet another 11% TDS shot, and I caught myself not making that poker face, that instinctive, reflexive facial grimace when you ingest something that's too acidic or too bitter. But the weird thing was, in Italy, I wasn't doing it, and that was really surprising. I kept waiting for that punch in the face moment Andrea and I talked about in the last video, where the intensity is so high it's unpleasant. But it rarely came, except in Napoli, and I'll get back to that later. So how is Italy pulling off these super strong espresso shots that don't torture your taste buds? The answer became more and more obvious the more shots I tasted and measured, and that is that the roasting and blending is all done to reduce acidity. So almost every shot tasted like cocoa powder. That was kind of the main thing. Sometimes there were hints of chocolate, sometimes a bit of nuts. On a few occasions, really, some dried fruits, but you never really had any citrus, any tropical fruits. So in Italy, fruits, they are for eating, they're not part of your espresso course. And this is really completely opposite from specialty coffee, where we chase bright, fruity, complex flavors, and acidity is kind of like celebrated in those types of coffees. So Italian baristas are looking for the opposite. They want to push strength without pushing acidity. And that means that shots just go down smoothly. It's not a challenge to finish. It's not something that you need to appreciate or understand. It just works. And that's when I started questioning everything and think, what could specialty coffee really learn from Italy? And I promise you, I'll get to that in just a moment. But I can't move on without going on a little tangent and tell you about Napoli, aka Naples, because the coffee there is just completely different. So I started the journey in Milan, then Como, then Liguria, finally Rome, and the shots were all pretty similar in terms of taste and also the general strength level. And that was a quite high baseline. But everything changed in Napoli, and actually the shots got even stronger. The average across the 10 shots I measured was 12.24% TDS, and that's not just strong, that's kind of outside what's considered a standard espresso, so the typical range is 8 to 12%, So Napoli was going quite far past that. But there were some other things that were also special about coffee in Napoli. And I think the geeks will really love this because I was really surprised. And that is virtually every cafe in Napoli uses the same espresso machine. And that's La San Marco lever. And it's a spring lever machine, so you have to pull the lever. So kind of an old school style. And the only difference between the different cafes was really whether it was a 2, 3, or 4 group version. But it was same brand, pretty much same model everywhere. And in other parts of Italy, I didn't see a single lever machine. Everywhere else in the north, it's like a pump-driven machine. But in Napoli, it's 100% levers. So that's pretty crazy. And what makes this even more fascinating is that La San Marco isn't even from the south. The company is based way up in the northeast, right at the border with Slovenia. So it's kind of a weird thing. I'm not even sure what the backstory is. If any of you guys know, then let me know down in the comment section. Another big difference in Napoli, and again, this surprised me, is that the coffee itself is quite a bit darker. Up north, I'd say the average shot was more of a medium roast. It's probably not as dark as you think. For instance, something like Starbucks would be more developed than most of the roasts I saw in the north. In Napoli, they really have their own style, extremely dark, extremely strong. At this point, you do start to get some of those charcoal burned notes, and you didn't really get that in other parts of the country. But this is where the sugar comes into play, because it turns out in Napoli, it's almost unthinkable to drink a shot of espresso without adding a little sachet of sugar. So it turns out Napoli isn't just stronger Italy, it's kind of a completely different espresso culture inside the same country. So different machines, darker roasts, higher extraction, pretty much. So when people talk about Italian espresso, they're really talking about two distinct traditions. And the data also backs that up. Northern and central Italy, on average, 9.39% TDS. In Napoli, 12.24% TDS. So that's a massive statistically significant difference. So leaving the south and looking at the country as a whole, I will say that the more I dug into how Italians actually make and enjoy espresso, the more I realized their approach is the exact opposite of modern espresso. So the first thing is really simplicity. Not a single cafe I went to during my trip had anything more than a basic tamper. There were no distribution tools, no scales, nothing fancy. The workflow is just super simple: dose, tamp, and extract. And still, the shots seemed really consistent. The second thing is that the 1:2 ratio is still king in Italy. So 7 grams in and 14 grams out. Or for a double shot, usually it's split in 2. Then it's 14 grams in and 28 grams out. And after talking to baristas and measuring extractions, it's clear that this classic espresso recipe, the one that spread from Italy to the rest of the world, it's alive and well. But here's the thing, when the recipe traveled from Italy to US and from there to the rest of the world, the coffee also changed on the way. So when specialty coffee took over, Robusta got completely banished. At the same time, roasting started to get lighter and lighter. And as you have more and more acidity in your coffee, it gets more difficult to get a balanced taste with that short 1:2 ratio. The third and last thing I learned in Italy is that espresso is cheap and fast, and it's supposed to be that way. So you pay €1.30 or €1.40 for a shot. You walk in, you stand at the bar, and then you just drink your shot in a couple of minutes, chat to people there, and then you're on with your day. In most other countries, cafes are more like third spaces. You're supposed to come and sit and hang out, maybe do some work. And in that context, espresso doesn't quite fit. It's over too quickly. So I went to Italy to experience a real espresso first culture, see how it was up close, and also see if there was anything that modern coffee could learn from it. And I do think Andre is right when he says espresso is dying in most cafes, not because people are wrong to prefer milk drinks, but because the espresso we are serving wasn't really designed for them in the first place. When you look at Italian espresso, it makes sense why it works. It's because it's cheap, it's fast, and comforting. But in other parts of the world, if we want a cafe culture that is slower, it's more deliberate, and more about exploring coffee nuances, then we might need some black coffee options that really fit that style of coffee shop environment better. So espresso, of course, still has a purpose. It's the most efficient way to extract a lot from a coffee pod. So it works like a delivery mechanism. And espresso as an ingredient is really thriving. But as a beverage that you're supposed to enjoy on its own, at the moment, it's kind of the red-headed stepchild on menus all over the place. It's there because it's supposed to be there, but not many people order it, and I can't really blame them. So maybe we should stop pretending that 1-to-2 ratio espresso is the answer and embrace formats that actually work for specialty coffee and sit-down cafe, because I think those are two things that we don't want to change. And there are actually already coffee shops doing this. For instance, Colonna and Smalls in London, they have the special Lungos. So it's a 1-to-5 ratio shot with the TDS around 3.5 to 4. And for them, it's like a flagship menu item. So people are nudged towards ordering that drink. It's not just one of many items on a screen. And I think that's really smart because pulling a longer shot with a light roast is actually very enjoyable. It's got the espresso legacy. It works really well overall. And it's also more consistent and faster for a cafe to make than, like, let's say, a pour over. At the same time, it's a bigger beverage. So customers, they feel more justified in paying a higher price, and they're also able to hang around and sit and enjoy the drink for a longer time. So could that be something for the future of specialty coffee? If you ask me, that would be pretty cool. What I don't think works that well anymore is serving a 10% TDS, high acidity espresso for a high price, and then expecting that regular people are going to like it. And if you're an espresso geek who does appreciate that strong shot with a bright acidity, that's great. You're probably already making better shots at home. So the cafe needs to serve everyone else. So my last espresso in Italy wasn't at some iconic cafe. It was at the Rome airport, standing at a bar. On my way to the gate, I also walked past this beautiful vintage Victoria Arduino machine. That classic style golden brass machine with an eagle on top. And then I ordered my final shot, and the price was €1.90, so pretty cheap for an airport coffee. I drank it in 1 minute, and I measured it exactly to 10% TDS. And while I was standing there ready to board, I realized something. This shot, I wasn't really analyzing the processing method or the roast degree. I was just kind of appreciating it. The texture, the mouthfeel, that kind of simple cocoa chocolate thing. It was nice, strong coffee at exactly the right time. And I think that's what we've forgotten in specialty coffee. We made espresso into something precious, complicated, when it's supposed to be a more simple and reliable drink. So it's a little bit like food. Sometimes you want something more fancy, extravagant, where you're kind of surprised and challenged a bit. And other times you just want something simple. Could be a hamburger, a sandwich. If you're South American, perhaps it's an empanada, but something comforting that's kind of like fitting your day. And there's value in both things. And I think there's also a real skill in doing simple things really, really well. So Italy reminded me of that. Not every coffee needs to be a meditation. Sometimes the best coffee is just the one that works. But I'm also very curious to hear what you think about the state of espresso and, of course, its future. And if you haven't seen the first video, my interview with Andre, where this whole journey started, then I'll link to it right here, and that will give you a very good background about this whole debate. So you can just click it, and then I'll see you right over there.